Chapter 7 of Hunters Out of Space. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elliot Miller. Hunters Out of Space by Joseph E. Kelliam. Chapter 7. Wolden and Ato, acting as pilot and co-pilot, set the nebula down with as much ease as a housewife putting a fine piece of china upon the drain board. There was no fuss and no noise. Jack Odin had seen B-47s come in with a great deal more hubbub and dithers than the nebula had caused. The screens were still on. Out there was all dark, and a wealth of stars was in the purple-black sky. They seemed larger and brighter. Wolden touched a knob, and the stars on the screen before them slowly grew larger and larger. "An astronomer's paradise," he said to Odin. "Look closely and you can see Centauri's binary suns. Here, with no refraction, a small telescope can do as well as the best that your people have made. There is no telling what your large ones could do. Ah, the riddles that could be answered." Odin shrugged. Like almost everyone else, he had often fancied how it would be to land on the moon. Now he was here, and the surface of the moon was blacker than the blackest night he had ever seen. Moreover, there had been no change in gravity. The nebula had been built to take care of that. As though sensing his thoughts, Wolden began to explain. "We are less than 50 miles from a spot where the earth could be seen. Not over a degree below the curvature. In fact, if the moon were full, there would be a bit of light here, for a strong light playing upon any globe always lights up over half of it. We are not far from the Heroian Mountains and the Bay of Dew. Just a few miles within that other side of the moon which none of your people have ever seen before." Odin remembered Jules Verne's account of a volcano spouting its last breath of life in that zone. But out there was nothing but the dark and the stars that smoldered like sapphires, rubies, and diamonds upon the black velvet sky. There were no shadows. The darkness was solid, as though it had frozen there since old and no spark had ever invaded it. "Be patient, my friend." Wolden had sensed his thoughts again. "Before long you will see more of the moon than men have ever known. We sent a smaller ship into space, remember? Our scientists are here, in a place beyond your dreams. Look, they are coming now." Wolden was adjusting the screen again. Far off, something like a long, jointed bug with a single glaring light on its head was crawling toward them. It drew nearer. Jack Odin saw it was no more than a huge caterpillar tractor with several cars attached, armored and sheathed with a sort of bellows-type connection at each joint. As it neared the nebula, it played its light around so that Odin got his first glimpse of the moon. Barren, worn, cindered, an ash heap turned to stone. Puddles and splashes like great crowns, as though liquid rock had congealed at the very height of its torment. Needles of rock, toadstools of rock, bubbles of rock, and glassy sheets of rock. This was the surface of the moon. Then the crawling tractor with its cars lumbering along behind it on their endless tracks was below them and playing its single light upward. An airlock in the nebula opened and a huge hose came slowly down. Odin watched it on the screen. It seemed to have been pleated and shoved together like an accordion. Now it opened out in little jerking movements, extending itself about 2 feet at each writhing twitch. As it grew longer, it expanded and was nearly 3 feet across when it reached the top of the first car. A round door opened. Unseen hands reached for the end of the big hose and fastened it securely. Odin had often dreamed of landing on the moon. There, in the traditional spacesuit, with a plastic bubble about his head, he would leap 20 feet into the air, and maybe even turn a somersault as a gesture of man's escape from the tiring tyranny of gravity. Compared to this dream, his arrival upon the moon was just a bit ridiculous. He and over a score of others simply slid down the inside of the long slanting hose like a group of third graders practicing on the fire escape at the schoolhouse. Larger than the others, Odin landed awkwardly upon the floor of the car. Before he could jump aside, another passenger piled on him. It was a girl, and the perfume in her hair was the same that Maya had always used. He helped her to her feet and drew her aside just as another voyager came sliding down. The girl was Nea. Somehow he had an odd feeling that Maya was here. He was just a bit annoyed at Nea and wished himself that she wasn't making the trip. She shook her black curls and thanked him softly. "How awkward of me," she explained. "It wouldn't have happened if I had not been carrying this." She held up a little round satchel. It was exactly like the cases that people used in his country for carrying bowling balls. Odin was puzzled, and he assured himself that he would never understand women. Why would the girl be carrying a bowling ball with her into outer space? Odin joined Walden, Ato, and Gunnar in the engine of the bumpy little train. Here were real windows of quartz, and he could see more of the moon's surface as the tractor and its joined cars wheeled about in a great circle and headed off in the direction from whence it had come. Once there was a loud ping upon the roof above them. The tractor shook. "A meteorite," the driver explained. "They're thick tonight. Don't worry. There's a screen up on the roof that slows them down and melts them. The larger ones never reach us. Some of the tiny ones get through." They came to a sheer mountain, which in the beams of the tractor looked like a silver pyramid painted across a jet black canvas. As though answering an unheard vibration, a door opened and they lumbered in. The door closed behind them. For a moment they were in such darkness that even the beam from the tractor seemed alien. Then another door started to open before them and a widening shaft of light was there to greet them. Odin was thinking that each race must have some craft at which it excels all others. If so, then the building of airlocks was certainly the Brons' highest art. Then they advanced into a cavern where 5 tiny atomic suns were strung out at equal distances upon the ceiling. The cavern was geometrical. Roughly, it was a mile long, half a mile wide, and half a mile high. The floor was smooth. The walls were sheer. As though they had been shaped by a human hand, Odin thought, but soon he learned that other hands had sheared those walls. In the middle of the cavern was a little lake, shaped in the same proportion as the floor. It was surrounded by green grass, and in one corner was a profusion of water lilies and cattails. There were no trees, but flowers were everywhere. A few small bushes. Here and there were great clumps of vines. Odin guessed them to be wild cucumber and trumpet vines, for they had grown riotously. It was beautiful indeed, but there were other things to catch the eye. At least 100 hemispheres, little igloos of porcelain, were scattered about the floor of the cave. Each one was a different color. They shimmered and glittered. Scarlet, mauve, mother of pearl, the blue capri, and the blue of cobalt. Pinks, yellows, oranges. Every possible shade had gone into those porcelain igloos. And the lighted walls of the cavern were covered from floor to ceiling with numberless figures, marching, fighting, working, playing. At first, Odin thought it was a vast procession of armored knights with huge chests and closed visors. But none of them stood completely erect, and each of them had 2 sets of arms. Straining his eyes at the windows to look up, Odin learned that the vast ceiling was completely covered by similar figures. In contrast to these was one huge tower of rough stone which Odin guessed to be new. So they came to the moon and disembarked, and at last Odin felt the lightened pull of the moon's gravity. He felt so free that he laughed and leaped into the air and turned a somersault just as he had dreamed of doing. Then one of the bronze scientists gave him a heavy pair of shoes, as if to remind him that no man can be altogether free. As he glumly strapped the heavy shoes to his feet, Jack thought of something his father had told him. No man was ever really free unless it was Robinson Crusoe. Then Friday showed up and became Crusoe's servant, and Crusoe's freedom flew away. 48 hours had passed since they had come to the cavern. Odin and Gunnar had gone with Walden to visit the scientist who had led the first expedition to the moon. The scientist, whose name was Gore, was explaining. "They were hardly out of the Iron Age. This was how we found this place. Our instruments detected a surplus of iron in this area.
They must have developed fast, for life did not last long.